In 2330, the captain of the exploration ship Frontier arrived in the Martian colony Cydonia. Over the coming days, the captain would meet the people of the mining colony and change their lives in ways big and small. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and these are some of the stories of the people of Sidonia. One of the most promising extraterrestrial targets after the moon, the exploration of Mars stretches back as far as Mariner 4's flyby on July 15, 1965. Though the first landing of a probe, Mars 3, took place on December 2, 1971, and many probes, landers, and rovers would follow, it wasn't until 2050 that the first humans set foot on the red planet. 62 years later, in 2112, the Deimos Staryard Corporation founded Sidonia to serve as a source of resources for its shipbuilding enterprise. It became one of the most important cities in the United Colonies upon its founding in 2159 and remains so to this day. Though by 2330 it has come to be viewed as a backwater by most of humanity, Sidonia is the largest colony in the Sol system and still provides the lion's share of the resources that feed Deimos, now the shipbuilder for the UC Navy. Centered around a large open pit mine, Sidonia is mostly industrial with a small residential district for the workers and support staff of the mines. Around the city sit frac stations, a UC Marine base, a shipping yard, a solar power plant, and an antiquated NASA launch pad from the early days of Martian settlement. The residential district is adjacent to the starport and separated into 4 levels. The uppermost level is home to the security office, Deimos Staryard Engineering, and the Broken Spear Bar. The next level down is home to the Colonial Governor's Office, Deimos' corporate offices, a monument to the face of Mars, the Trade Authority, the UC Exchange, Reliant Medical, and Enhance. Below this level, within the residential section, sits the Community Center, Miners' Quarters, UC Barracks, Lux Condominiums, and Jane's Goods. At the very bottom level of the city sits the 6th Circle Bar, beside the vast open mining floor where miners extract valuable ore. Deep beneath the city, in tunnels that stretch far into the distance, miners work in the deep mines, using particle detonations to frack the stone and send ore up to the city. Though there were many possible reasons the captain might have come to Sidonia, for the purposes of this video, the captain was simply curious about life on Mars. Upon their arrival, the captain made their way from the thin, dusty atmosphere outside, past the airlock and the dust shields, into the entry hall. Here, the captain spotted a woman leaning against the city's directory with an air of confidence. Intrigued, the captain struck up a conversation. As it turned out, this woman was a member of the Trackers Alliance, a guild of bounty hunters, and they had jobs available. She explained that, though she would have preferred to be out hunting bounties, on her last job she had captured the wrong bounty while the right one got away. Not only this, but she had killed the bounty in cuffs because he had tried to hit on her. Though it had been a dead or alive type bounty, the Trackers Alliance hadn't taken her failure on the first count and the murder on the second count lightly. Thus, she had been sidelined for the moment and was stuck on recruiting duty in Sidonia. Though she pointed the captain to the nearby message board, she hadn't given up on the bounty that got away. When the captain asked if she needed help in this effort, she happily took them up on their offer. She explained that she had heard that the bounty, a smuggler named Ken Plackis, may be on Mars. This made sense as, though it was one of the primary worlds of the United Colonies, Mars was less populated than places like New Atlantis. There was less of a chance Plackis would be spotted by the Trackers Alliance, but he would still have access to communications and the overall market. Plackis had good reason to stay hidden. He wasn't the run-of-the-mill smuggler. He was wanted for grand theft, human trafficking, even murder. The Trackers Alliance agent had a plan. Unbeknownst to Plackis, he had a tracker on him. Though it wasn't something that could be followed long range, it would trip the right kind of sensor, and she had just the sensor to wait for that signal. The agent sent the captain to the old Mars launch pad, a NASA site that had been without a purpose for a long time. There, atop the old launch gantry, the captain placed the sensor and returned to the Trackers Alliance agent. She thanked the captain with part of the bounty and went back to recruiting while monitoring the sensor from this point on. Happy to have potentially helped track down a murdering slaver, the captain headed into the Broken Spear. The upper of Sidonia's 2 bars, the Broken Spear was far more friendly to out-of-towners. Behind the counter, Jack dispensed alcohol to the masses. Though he claimed to hate hearing people's life stories, he was a good listener and would help those he cared for when he could. The captain walked through the bar, speaking with those they came across. One of the more interestingly named individuals was Andromeda Kepler, an aspiring explorer and author. Though the captain could sense that she was looking for a ship, the Frontier was full at the moment, so they politely excused themselves from the conversation and returned to their own exploration. While most of the bar's patrons appeared to be visitors or miners, there was one well-dressed man who sat alone at a table with dozens of books piled up in front of him. Not only was he seemingly in the bar on business, but he also wasn't drinking, nor did he appear to be conscious. The captain approached him, and after he aroused himself from his slumber, he apologetically introduced himself as Phil Hill, an employee of LIST, the League of Independent Settlers. He told the captain of his organization and his work in finding potential colonists, providing them with a new world to settle, and the supplies to do so successfully. He was a strong believer in the concept of LIST, the creation of independent settlements beholden to no larger government, but he didn't have the courage to settle himself. Instead, he acted as a facilitator. With his workload as heavy as it was, he could use some help, and the captain was willing to oblige. On the behalf of LIST, they recruited a man who was looking for a new challenge in life, and then surveyed an unsettled world in the Leviathan system on which a new colony could prosper. While Hill appreciated this and paid the captain for their efforts, there would always be more work to do. The captain excused themselves from the table, making a mental note to help LIST out when they had more time, and headed for the door. Once outside, they headed for the stairs down to the main promenade. Here, the captain found the monument to the face of Mars. On July 25, 1976, Viking 1 photographed the Cydonia region of Mars, the area in which Deimos' Sidonia now sits. A transitional zone between the far more cratered lands to the south and the smooth plains to the north. It's believed that the region known as Sidonia was once a coastal plain. Though it's a fairly smooth area, Viking 1 photographed several geological formations in the area, including a mesa that had the appearance of a face. Though it became known as the face of Mars in popular culture, Gerald Soffen, NASA's chief scientist for the Viking program, immediately dismissed the face as a trick of light and shadow. Further imaging by the Mars Global Surveyor in 2001 and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2007 proved this to be the case. The monument to the face of Mars in Sidonia serves as the only tourist attraction in a city otherwise devoted to industry. After viewing the monument, the captain began to visit the various shops on the promenade to meet their operators. Starting with Enhance, the captain met Dr. Ifeanyi Adigwe. Dr. Adigwe had taken this job because he believed that he would be choosing an easy life. He thought, how many miners could want cosmetic surgery? As it turned out, a lot of them. This wasn't for vanity though, these people simply needed to be restored to normal after industrial accidents left them with gaping scars, horrendous burns, and amputated limbs. Dr. Adigwe was working around the clock. While part of him wanted to transfer to a different, more white-collar world, he knew that he would probably never be doing more good for a population than he was doing here on Sidonia. Next door to Enhance, the captain met Dr. Charlie Flynn, the attending physician at Reliant Medical. Like her counterpart at Enhance, Dr. Flynn was endlessly inundated with patients. Though she also dealt with the immediate response to the injuries that took patients next door, she also dealt with plain old illnesses and other internal conditions. Though she was happy to help, Dr. Flynn was frustrated with how many patients she saw were in her office for easily preventable injuries caused by carelessness. Leaving Reliant Medical behind, the captain came to UC Exchange and Dennis Averin. Averin spent much of his youth traveling the settled systems on a host of different ships with crews of diverse backgrounds. Because of this, he spoke in an accent foreign to Sidonia and spoke many languages. One of the two larger shops in Sidonia, the UC Exchange got plenty of business. As the only employee of this branch of the UC Exchange, Averin was always busy. When the captain arrived, he was dealing with a supply issue. Specifically, a shipment that was supposed to have been delivered was instead sitting on a ship landed somewhere in the Martian desert. As to why this was the case, Averin didn't know, although he speculated that it may have crashed, a devastating thought for his goods. Though ship services would eventually get around to resolving the situation, Averin needed those goods ASAP. Hoping to help the overtaxed shop owner out, the captain offered to go check on the craft. He thanked the captain and told him that all he needed to know was if the crates were intact. He could hire someone to carry the goods if he knew they were available for transport. The captain headed off onto the dusty surface of Mars towards the missing ship on foot. After a trek across the Martian landscape, the captain found the ship had crash-landed, but was mostly intact. They found the airlock and made their way inside. Within, the captain was greeted by the sight of a dead crew member in work clothes gripping a spacesuit, as though they were rushing to put it on when they were felled. Almost immediately, it was clear that the ship was infested with heat leeches. Disgusting worm-like creatures, heat leeches were known to wrap themselves around equipment and siphon the heat off, causing heat-dependent equipment to fail. Soon, the captain found an audio recording of the crash landing, and it was clear that the leeches had brought the ship down. They then proceeded to search the cargo, exterminating surviving heat leeches within. With a handful of boxes having survived the crash, and with the heat leeches dead, the captain returned to Sidonia and Averin. The shopkeeper was happy to hear that some of the cargo had survived, and thus he thanked the captain and told them he would send out a crew to collect the goods. With that issue resolved, Averin still had more work for the captain if they were interested. He needed second-hand goods to sell, and he had leads on where to find them. The captain decided to indulge this request and headed off to an old mine on Delta Volpes 5B. Here they battled through a party of Crimson Fleet pirates and left with one of the 5 Kraken handguns Averin had requested. After rounding up another 4, the captain brought the weapons to UC Exchange and was paid 4,500 credits for their trouble. When they left the exchange, the captain was fairly certain that Averin would be happy to work a similar deal with them as many times as they cared to put in the work. Across the promenade, the captain found the other major shop in Sidonia, the Trade Authority. The captain had heard that they were free trade absolutists, and in speaking with their representative, Menaki Almonte, it became clear that they were willing to buy anything, including illicit goods, even if they wouldn't say so out loud. And they would trade with anyone, even groups like the Crimson Fleet and House Faroon. On Sidonia, the Trade Authority was vitally important to some miners, as their willingness to buy anything meant that when quotas were missed, or when the miners had some unexpected expense, they could get by selling what they had to the Trade Authority. Though the captain didn't have anything at the moment to trade, Sorsha Bowden, another of their representatives, made it clear that the Trade Authority was offering cargo shipping jobs on local job boards. In the back, Octai and Bayer had nothing to say to the captain for the moment, but will eventually feature in another video. Next door to the Trade Authority sat the office of Colonial Governor Glenn Hurst. In speaking with his receptionist, Demelza Myers, the captain confessed that they had no appointment, but was ushered in regardless as the governor liked to speak with the people. Though the governor touted the importance and quality of Sidonia, he was unwilling to speak on political matters without a donation. When the captain tried donating 1,000 credits to loose the governor's lips, it was made clear that such a donation was well under the minimum requirement. Despite the glad handing they received on Sidonia generally speaking, the captain left the governor's office feeling there was something dirty going on behind the scenes. Not one to ignore a problem, the captain headed to the governor's home in the Lux condominiums. The residents of Sidonia lived in one of 3 sections. The United Colonies Marines lived in the UC barracks. The Deimos miners lived in the miners' barracks. Everyone else lived in the comically named Lux condominiums. Though Lux, by comparison to the barracks, these condominiums were typically a single room that combined the purposes of bedroom and living room. Bathrooms were a communal affair down the hall. By comparison to the other condominiums, the governor's 2-floor abode was indeed luxe. On the bottom floor they found a sitting room, but nothing of importance. In heading up the stairs, the captain found the governor's bedroom and, more importantly, his computer. In checking the governor's messages and appointments, the appearance of misdeeds began to grow. His son David was requesting a large sum of credits to help his family. The fact that he was asking for more credits while indicating that he still had 200,000 credits in his account indicated that this was no small quantity of money that he was requesting. So the fact that he was asking his father for it via email rather than in person gave the appearance that it was a common request between the two. This, combined with the governor's mention of requiring high-value donations to talk politics, was not a good look. There was an innocent message from the governor's wife about her extended absence while conducting a seminar, and a few further messages that pointed to an affair, an aborted affair, and one that ended poorly at that. It seemed that the governor's one-time mistress had stolen his ship. Unsure of what to do with this latest information, the captain left the governor's apartment behind and began to head deeper into the residential block. What they had seen were hints of corruption and infidelity, but nothing concrete. As the captain neared the main level, they saw a young boy sitting alone in a hallway looking sad. When the captain asked him what was wrong, he introduced himself as Taye and told the captain that his mother was sad. His father was dead and she was alone. He explained how she'd been attending drinking meetings, but these had made her sad too. Taye didn't understand what his mother had been up to, but the captain did. From announcements over the PA system and snatches of conversation they had heard, it was clear to the captain that Sidonia had a serious problem with depression and alcoholism. The captain agreed to meet with Taye's mother and headed into their condominium. Here they met Anna Amani. Mrs. Amani was slightly annoyed by the intrusion, more so that her son had sent yet another adult to check on her and was apologetic for his actions. The captain inquired about her circumstances and what had happened to Taye's father. She told the captain how the family had come to Sidonia years before, how she had been in line to become the head of the local branch of Galbank until it was unexpectedly automated. leaving her jobless. How her husband Keith had died in a mining accident. How Deimos had agreed to pay her a stipend and provide her and her son with an apartment until he turned 18. Unfortunately, it was all the money she could earn, as there were no jobs for a person with her skill set in Sidonia. Feeling compassionate, the captain handed Anna Imani 20,000 credits in the hopes of getting her and her son a better life. She thanked the captain and promised to put it away for her son's education. The captain left the condominium and headed back into the main hall. Here they met Renee Shelby, a young girl who, like Taye, was simply sitting in a hallway. Interested in meeting outsiders, she introduced herself. It seems that she and Taye were the only kids in Sidonia. Though there were certainly residents who were here long term, most folks came to Sidonia to earn money and get out, not raise families. Renee and Taye were engaged in distance learning, a program that the captain had heard advertised over the PA system. Renee was concerned with the general mood in Sidonia, noting that many of the residents were sad. Hoping to brighten the spirits of the people, Renee had drawn up a half-dozen posters of Space Frog from outer space, a character of her own creation, to post around the city. Though she wanted to post the pictures herself, her parents forbade her from leaving the vicinity of the condominium while they were at work, so she enlisted the captain's help in putting them up. Wanting to help the creative youth, the captain took the posters all over the city, posting them in spots where they might brighten the day of passers-by. Not only this, but with Renee's help, the captain was able to post pictures of Space Frog from outer space and their various outposts. Happy to have helped, the captain left Renee Shelby behind and headed for the common area. Here, leaning against the wall, was a gregarious young man named Mitch Benjamin. In speaking with Mitch, the captain soon learned that he was medically unemployed and lived his life consuming media. It seems that he was born with a genetic condition, and this was made worse by an attempt at treating it. The company had settled with him by providing him with a modest payoff that allowed him to live comfortably enough. There was just one thing he wanted more of: content. Specifically at the moment, he was looking for a first edition copy of Dragonstar Force Volume 1, the first book in a science fiction fantasy series that he loved. He'd found a copy on another world and asked the captain if they knew anyone with a ship who would be willing to go pick it up. Wanting to help this friendly young man, the captain took a quick trip to Paradiso on Porama 2, where they found the book for a reasonable fee. Mitch was ecstatic that he finally had his first edition and thanked the captain with a few thousand credits. Once again in the common area, the captain found Jane's Goods, the only locally owned and operated store in Sidonia. The proprietor, Jane Weller, was happy to make the captain's acquaintance, and the two discussed her rise. She had started selling basic goods here and there, whatever she could get her hands on. Eventually, she set up the store, and recently, she even got her hands onto a ship to pick up goods from off-world. It was here in the conversation that she asked the captain for some assistance. It seemed that her ship, the Barry Mule, was gone longer than it should have been. She was concerned both for it and for its captain, Eric von Price. Happy to help this independent business owner, the captain headed for the orbit of Triton, where the ship was last in contact. Luckily, the ship was intact, but it was under the command of a new owner, Ecliptic Mercenaries. The captain managed to convince the Ecliptic commander to let them on board. Here they found a half-dozen guards and Eric von Price tied up. The Ecliptic commander explained the situation. The Barry Mule was stolen property, and they'd been hired to bring it back to its original owner. Jane had mentioned that she'd gotten a great deal on the ship, and it seemed that that deal was too good to be true. It was an unpleasant situation. If the Barry Mule was indeed stolen property, then legally it did belong to its original owner, regardless of Jane's payment. That said, buying the craft had practically depleted all of Jane's finances, and she would pretty much have to start over. Using their best persuasive skills, the captain managed to convince the Ecliptic Mercs to let it go, both the Barry Mule and its captain Eric von Price. The commander agreed to chalk up the ship as lost, but warned the captain that if the original owner ever found out, the mercenaries would be back. With that, the captain spoke with Eric von Price, who was amazed by the captain's persuasive acumen, and thanked them for their help. A brief time later, the captain was back in Sidonia with Jane Weller. Jane was upset that she had indeed purchased a stolen ship, but she was thrilled that the captain had saved both it and her employee. She planned to lie low for a while in hopes of not antagonizing the original owner, but she wouldn't have to start over. She paid the captain 11,000 credits and promised discounts on future purchases. Happy to have helped, the captain left Jane's Goods and headed into the common room. Here, amid the clamor of Sidonians working out, playing games, having conversations, cooking, and relaxing, the captain saw a man in a miner's jumpsuit walking through the crowd, seemingly in a different world. Wondering what was on the man's mind, the captain struck up a conversation. His name was Waylon Parker, and just like his outfit implied, he was indeed a miner, although by his own account, he didn't really like his job, nor was he particularly good at it. It seems that he was accident-prone and he had to visit Dr. Flynn on a regular basis. Though he couldn't work up the courage to do so, he wanted to apologize to the doctor for taking up so much of her time. The captain wished him luck and bid him farewell. Not far away, they met a young woman named Sivan. Sivan had been a rebellious youth as she made chaos to avoid the boredom of a quiet life. When the captain inquired as to why she had come to the community center, she replied that she was doing some soul searching. The captain excused himself and met another woman nearby named Hattie Gustafson. Miss Gustafson was struggling to cope with the loss of her son. A soldier fighting in the Colony War, he had fallen in battle 2 decades prior, and Miss Gustafson had never gotten over the fact that she had never been able to say goodbye. She had come to the community center to speak with a pair of individuals that offered their services in the common room, a man in a religious headdress and a woman seated behind a desk. These two were members of 2 humanitarian organizations common to the settled systems. The man in the headdress, Horace Gamal, was a member of the religious Sanctum Universum, while the woman behind the desk was Joy Bryant, a member of the humanistic House of Enlightenment. Interested in their beliefs, the captain spoke to each in turn. With Horace, the conversation began with an offer of assistance and an invitation to discuss the benevolent creator of the universe. Interested in his beliefs, the captain pressed him for more information. To this, Horace extolled the virtues of a loving God that breathed life into humanity and opened the ways to the heavens. When asked why God would open the way to the heavens to bring humanity closer to him, instead of simply bringing humanity all the way to him, Horace responded that truly following the teachings of the Creator God required faith. He made the way available. It was up to us to prove ourselves worthy by making the journey to him. Further, he offered his services in spiritual guidance, a service he offered to all who came to the Sidonia common room in conjunction with his secular associate, Joy. With that, the captain went to speak with said associate, Joy Bryant. Joy kindly greeted the captain with an offer of assistance and an invitation to discuss her organization, the House of Enlightenment. Interested in her beliefs, the captain pressed her for more information. She explained that the followers of her organization, known as the Enlightened, serve a human community-centric institution. They put faith in other humans, rather than any unknowable god or religious dogma, and strived to better humanity. While she and Horace disagreed on the nature of existence, both were here in Sidonia to help the downtrodden and respected each other for their efforts. The captain left the common room behind and ventured into the Deimos mining barracks. While the captain did have a mining background with Argos extractors, they weren't an employee of Deimos and probably shouldn't have been there. Regardless, no one bothered to call them out on their trespass, so the captain decided to scope out how these people lived. It was not a comfortable place to be. Though each miner had their own individual space, these rooms, if you can call them that, were small. Some of them were separated from each other by nothing but a chain link fence. Each of these spaces contained an uncomfortable-looking bed and a locker. Only one bed was truly enclosed in a space of its own, likely belonging to the lead miner. In the communal eating space, the captain brushed up on a copy of Mining Monthly Issue 7 before looking at the communal computer. Here they found announcements and suggestions. In checking each, the captain learned that the mining tools used by the locals were on their last legs. Not only were there constant tool failures, but they were also completely out of spare equipment. Every time a tool went down, it had to be repaired as quickly as possible. Having finished their unguided tour of the mining barracks, the captain headed to the UC Marine barracks. Just as before, the captain was allowed to roam the barracks freely. If anything, the Marines' quarters made the miners' hall look positively cozy. Here the Marines all shared a communal living space, sleeping in bunk beds. After taking the time to check out a copy of UC Defense Manual 3 that happened to be laying out, the captain took another look around the room and saw something they hadn't expected. While Sidonia was widely known for not being the most glamorous posting for the Marines, the captain saw one Marine looking oddly content. So they decided to speak with him. It turned out his name was Chris Cullen, and as his demeanor suggested, he was happy. While most of his family were members of the managerial class in New Atlantis, Chris wanted to see the stars, thus he joined the Marines. Though he was happy with his decision, he did miss his family back home, and thus he asked the captain if they would be willing to make a special delivery to his sister for her birthday. The captain agreed and was soon boost packing through the capital of the UC. When they found Logan Cullen, they greeted her and asked her about herself. She discussed her life in New Atlantis and how she enjoyed the constant flow of newcomers, learning the stories of people from all over the settled systems. When presented with her gift, she was thrilled. She had known that Chris wasn't going to make it home and asked how he was doing. The captain truthfully told her that he was doing well, for which Logan was thankful. With that, the captain departed New Atlantis and headed for the Sol system once more. Back in Sidonia, the captain realized they had yet to explore the mining floor. Heading down the elevator from the promenade, the captain found a wide open area covered in heaps of rock. Between these piles, men and women walked, hefting heavy mining lasers, with which they extracted ore from the rock. Before heading out to meet these people, the captain headed for the Sixth Circle, a bar that catered mostly to locals. Unlike the bustling Broken Spear, there were only a few patrons present in the bar, and most of them weren't interested in speaking. Along with the miners, the other clientele who frequented this bar were members of the now defunct Red Devils. Once famous for their skill, discipline, and red eyes, a side effect of mining Mars, the Red Devils became infamous for their activity in the Colony War. At the opening of the war, when the United Colonies had found the Freestar Collective's settlement of Vesta to be illegal, they had sent the Red Devils into combat with a pack of mind-controlled aliens. Among the defenders of Vesta, the fatality rate was 93%. After years of fighting for the UC, this elite unit of Marines was decommissioned upon the implementation of a ban of the use of xenoweapons. While many in the Freestar Collective were surely not fans of the Red Devils, there were still many in the United Colonies that remembered the good old days, back when they were simply known as one of the UC's most elite fighting forces. The wall behind the bar was decorated with images of the former unit, a backdrop to the bartender, Lou Saavedra, himself a veteran of the Red Devils. As the captain wasn't a veteran, Lou refused him service. When questioned on this stance, he offered up the possibility of Vanguard service being sufficient, but that's a story for another time. Aside from Lou Saavedra, the Sixth Circle was also host to Andrew Robillard, who wanted nothing to do with the captain, and Cambridge Cooper, who will feature in a future video, but for the moment wanted nothing to do with the captain either. Leaving this unfriendly bar behind, the captain returned to the mining floor and began to stroll between the piles of rock. Here they met some of the miners of Mars and got a feeling for the life they lived. First came Andres Jensen. Andres had been mining for about 15 years and was reaching the age where he was considering retiring. That said, he wouldn't stop working altogether, and he was making such good money that he was hesitant to leave mining for another job. Besides this, he appreciated Deimos. His pay was significantly higher here than it would be with any other firm. That said, his family was systems away, and he hated having his kid grow up without him. Living with them though, working a different job, he might not make enough to properly support his family, so he was conflicted. Leaving Andres behind, the captain met Salmond Berg Ramirez. The first thing Salmond did was make sure the captain was safe. When the captain responded that they'd been a miner with Argos extractors and was well aware of the necessary safety precautions, Salmond joked that he didn't know anyone survived working with Argos, before backing off and suggesting that merely their security needed an upgrade, a point the captain could get behind after the pirate attack on their previous job on Vectera. After this, he revealed his refusal to use nicknames. It was Salmond, not Sam or Sammy, and offered his expertise when it came to the mines of Sidonia. The captain asked if he was close to retiring, to which Salmond replied that he was going to mine until he died. Though he was hesitant to speak about his past, he also revealed that he had once been a criminal before prison had straightened him out. Next, the captain met Gari Limsong, the blast supervisor. She told the captain how much she enjoyed her work, though she lamented the fact that she didn't get the opportunity to employ particle detonations in her work here on the surface. From Gari Limsong, the captain walked over to speak with Henry Ferraro, or Hank as he preferred to be called. Once an employee of the restaurant Chunks, Hank thought mining was boring, but it was easy and he liked the pay. When asked about his past, Hank got cagey and refused to answer. Moving on from Hank, the captain saw Rivkah Ovadia, who seemed to be trying to keep her head down, and for the moment had nothing to say to the captain. Next, the captain met Layla Pulaski. Layla was on her second contract mining Mars and was happy with the living conditions. She had grown up on one of the snowball worlds of the settled systems and was much happier in the barren but drier Mars. This satisfaction with her job led her to be an extremely efficient worker. The captain had seen on the miner's computer how she had regularly managed to exceed her quota by 20%, a feat that had made her Employee of the Month. She was also fiercely loyal to Deimos, and when the captain innocently asked for mining tips, she refused to share company trade secrets. Layla had also taken to spreading rumors of a legendary Heart of Mars, a naturally occurring large chunk of pure titanium in some lost cavern. The captain had heard these rumors discussed by miners in the common room and asked Layla about it directly. She gave the captain the coordinates of a cave and suggested they look for themselves. Curious about this story, the captain headed off to the other side of Mars where they indeed found a cave. Deep within, they came across just such a chunk of native titanium. Confused as to why Layla would indeed point them to this legendary mineral, the captain returned to Sidonia. She was shocked. She had intended the trip to be a prank, one she had played on other new miners before. It just so happened that she gave the captain the wrong coordinates that, as improbable as it might be, brought them to a cave with a real chunk of native titanium. She congratulated the captain and went back to her business. The captain considered selling the Heart of Mars, which they believed to be worth about 28,000 credits, but decided to keep it. Next, the captain came to Gnome. Once a mining robot, Gnome had broken down 9 years prior, and instead of repairing it, the company had turned it into a personal assistant. Gnome was responsible for playing general announcements, relaying messages between miners, reporting on local news, and telling jokes. The captain had seen a request on the miner's computer to stop programming snarky responses for Gnome, a function Layla had confessed to in their conversation. Lastly, the captain came to Trevor Petyar, the mining director. They discussed the subterranean particle detonations, his work for Deimos from 17 years old to 6 years prior when he was made mining director, and problems with their old equipment. On that last matter, the captain had become well-versed. From both the miner's computer and the miners the captain had spent time with, the most common complaint they had was that their equipment was woefully inadequate. Old, prone to breakdown, and without any readily available replacement, it was slowing down progress and risking their ability to meet their quotas. Regardless of constant requests for new machinery, Trevor had been unable to get the higher-ups to approve anything. He had a new plan to get his workers what they needed, but that plan required an outsider to make it happen. To gauge if they had some basic skill, Trevor asked that the captain mine and return 10 units of iron ore. With ease, the captain extracted the ore and deposited it in a minecart. With that test passed, the mining director revealed the first step of the plan. The captain was going to get themselves hired by Deimos. To accomplish this, they would head to the orbiting Deimos star yard. There, they would apply for the job of the local administrator's assistant. Once this was accomplished, they would discuss the next part of the plan. Happy to help the miners get what they needed, the captain departed Cydonia for the second moon of Mars. In orbit above Mars's tiny satellite Deimos was the Deimos star yard. Upon docking with the station, the captain went aboard and proceeded to explore the orbital station. Here they met Nikau Henderson. Mr. Henderson was a veteran combat pilot who had spent his career in Deimos ships. He credited Deimos for surviving his long and storied career, and now sold ships for them. Other than Mr. Henderson, the only other employee aboard the station willing to talk to the captain was Sandra Fullerton. In speaking with Miss Fullerton, she let it slip that while she enjoyed her work, she wished that she worked with more light-hearted people. Beyond this, she missed one of the drinks she used to get back home in New Atlantis. Wanting to make a good impression with their soon-to-be co-workers, the captain departed momentarily for New Atlantis and Jake's Bar in the Well. After purchasing a Jake's Stout for Sandra Fullerton, they returned to the Deimos star yard and handed it over. She was elated. She promised she definitely wouldn't drink it while on the job, and handed the captain 2,500 credits for their trouble. With the local personnel met, the captain made their way to the public terminal and applied for the administrative assistant role as requested. With their current goal accomplished, the captain left the space station. Upon returning to Sidonia, the captain headed back down to the mining floor and Trevor. The mining director was ready to go with the next part of the plan. They would head to the local Deimos office and wait for the staff to go to happy hour. At that point, the captain would sneak in and remove all applications but their own from the system. As the only choice, there would be no chance they wouldn't be hired. With that, the captain headed for the Deimos office. Once the ladies of the office left, the captain ducked in and made use of the HR terminal. After deleting the other applications, the captain returned it to Trevor for the next step of the plan. Trevor congratulated the captain on their new job and explained what came next. He needed the captain to get into their new boss's computer and to approve his request for new tools. Thinking this task should be simple enough to accomplish, the captain returned to the Deimos office and met their new boss. Peter Brennan, completely unaware that the captain wasn't his previous assistant that had quit weeks ago, demanded to know where they had been before assigning them a task. Foiled from immediately accessing the necessary computer, the captain was now required to go to Governor Hurst and request the release of a shipment that was being held up by city officials for some reason unknown to Mr. Brennan. Left with the impression that their new temporary boss wasn't quite there mentally, the captain departed for the governor's office at once. Just as when they'd first met the governor, they strolled into his office without a meeting and found the man behind his desk. This conversation proved slightly eerie as the governor revealed that he'd been aware of many of the captain's actions in the city. He knew they were up to something, but he wasn't going to make a problem of it as he didn't believe that what they were up to was a threat to him or to the city. He further confirmed the captain's belief that Peter Brennan had a few screws loose by revealing that the package he was looking for had been held up because he hadn't paid his taxes, a situation he had been messaged about many times. Governor Hurst was willing to help the captain out with their task if they would help him out with one of his own. The governor explained that his ship had been stolen, perhaps by Crimson Fleet pirates, and requested that the captain destroy it. When they asked why not go through UC security, he claimed he didn't want to be wrapped up in that process, and further that it would be embarrassing if it became public that he had had his government-issued ship stolen. Unfortunately for the governor, the captain already knew that it hadn't been the Crimson Fleet pirates that had stolen his ship, but his former mistress. The fact that he was contracting out a hit on the ship and his former mistress within was startling. While the captain could have requested additional funds from the governor, 5,000 credits for their trouble, they wanted to have as few ties to Hurst as possible. Hoping to both help the miners and find some real proof of the governor's misdeeds, the captain agreed to his request and headed for the starport. Soon, they had tracked down the governor's ship and found it drifting listlessly in orbit around Uranus's moon, Umbriel. Over the comms, they were greeted by a shipjacker feigning distress. Knowing who had stolen the ship in the first place and that this speaker was not her, it occurred to the captain that the governor may have hired others before giving this job to them. Assuming that the governor's suggestion that the Crimson Fleet had stolen the ship may be a clue as to who he had hired, the captain asked to come aboard, claiming to be a member of the Crimson Fleet themselves. Once on board, the shipjacker revealed himself to be, as expected, a Crimson Fleet pirate, and demanded the captain hand their ship over. The captain managed to persuade them to look the other way and even to help them with some information on the governor, which the pirate did. The slate he handed over was a smoking gun. It was both an admission by the governor that he'd been engaging in an affair, but also a contract to hire the Crimson Fleet to blow up his ship and murder his former lover. Amazed by the governor's careless evil, the captain searched the vessel and found the body of the governor's mistress. On her person, an apparent suicide note. It seems that the woman the governor had hired the Crimson Fleet to kill, Sylvia Schloss, had done the deed herself after a week of drifting without fuel. With that, the captain departed the ship and returned to Sidonia. Determined to hold the governor accountable for his actions, the captain headed for the security office. In the outer office, adjacent to a single jail cell, the captain met Booth, the security officer in charge of Sidonia's internal security. Booth was driven to keep crime in the city low and had done a respectable job of it by his own estimation. Though Booth may have been able to handle the situation, the fact that it was the governor himself that would be subject to investigation led the captain to the next office, that of Security Chief Commander Vincent Woodard. Woodard was a veteran, the former head of the Red Devils. He loved Mars and Cydonia and would defend its people to his dying breath. When presented with the evidence gathered by the captain, he claimed he would arrest the governor. When the captain revealed the necessity of releasing Mr. Brennan's shipment, Commander Woodard agreed to wait to arrest the governor until the deal with the captain was complete. With that, the captain headed for the governor's office. Keeping the true story of events from Hurst, the captain claimed to have blasted the stolen ship. The governor thanked the captain by releasing Peter Brennan's shipment and even deferred his late taxes. With that matter taken care of, the captain headed back to the Deimos office and conferred with their new boss. Thankful that he had his shipment, Peter Brennan provided the captain with his computer password and asked them to go through his messages, responding as he would. Amazed at the man's loose connection to reality, the captain headed into the office and opened his computer. In his message folder, there were emails from a potential orb buyer, the company psychologist Gilly Song, Governor Hurst about his unpaid taxes and held-up shipment, and Peter's former assistant, Tim O'Shea. Tim's email detailed one potential version of how Peter had managed to maintain his position despite his clear incompetence. Nepotism. Peter's father knew someone high up in Deimos and had used this connection to get his son work. The fact that this insulting email attacking Peter's competence, work ethic, and hygiene had gone completely unnoticed for months was damning corroboration of its claims. From here, the captain moved on to the requests. Rather than simply approving Trevor's equipment replacement request, the captain first approved an increase to PTO, new drinks in the miners' quarters, and even a message from the office staff about Peter not reading his emails disguised as a request. With no other options, the captain approved Trevor's request and left the Deimos office and the fake job as Peter's assistant behind. With a quick jump down several stories and a boost pack jump to slow their fall, the captain returned to Trevor with the good news. Trevor was thrilled that his plan had worked, but there was a new problem. Their new equipment hadn't arrived. Upon hearing that the equipment purchase had been approved, Hank Ferraro had volunteered to go pick the gear up on Gagarin and was late coming back. Though Trevor had been impressed with his work ethic, he was starting to worry and asked the captain to investigate it. Leaving the mining floor behind, the captain started the investigation with a stop at ship services. The tech at Ship Services recalled Hank recently leaving Mars and then returning, but landing outside the city instead of at the spaceport. When the captain asked why he would do such a thing, the tech was at a loss. This wasn't a typical land outside the city limits to avoid contraband scans sort of thing. He had approached the port and then called off the landing at the last minute to land somewhere else. With this confusing account of Hank's actions in mind, the captain returned to Trevor. The mining director was concerned by the news the captain brought. Something about the situation didn't add up. Along with this, while the captain had been with Ship Services, Trevor had asked Hank's fellow miners about his recent disposition, and they had revealed that he had been a bit more unstable lately than usual. Trevor suggested the captain check in at the Broken Spear, as that's where Hank typically drank. The captain departed and soon found him drinking at the bar. When they questioned him about the missing equipment, he offered the captain a beer. After all they had done to get the equipment for the miners, the captain wasn't feeling terribly friendly towards Hank, and thus refused, demanding that they talk about the equipment. Hank began to question the captain about why they were sticking their nose into the miners' business. When confronted about the equipment, he confessed that he hadn't brought it back, and reasoned that it was because he didn't want to bring it back. He was mad at his co-workers. He believed that they were regularly disrespecting him, and he didn't want them to be helped. Further, he figured that losing the equipment would be the last straw for them, and they would all be fired, him included. He didn't like working here, but he had a 3-year contract that he couldn't afford to break. Confronted on how he was hurting those around him, he replied that he was fine with it. He figured they were against him, so he didn't mind harming them and carrying out his plan. As a last resort, the captain told Hank that what he had done was criminal, and that he could be arrested for it, especially given that he had just confessed to it. Hank agreed to give the captain the equipment if they wouldn't report him to security. With that, he and the captain began the walk to his ship. Soon the two of them were walking across the surface of Mars. After a 5-minute trek with Hank talking about other plans he had considered now and then, they finally arrived at Hank's destination, the spot he planned to kill the captain. Using their powers of persuasion, the captain talked Hank down and convinced him to turn himself in to the authorities. While he didn't want to be locked up, he also didn't want to kill the captain, and this would also likely get him out of his contract without him having to buy himself out. Upon returning to Sidonia, Hank and the captain entered the security office, and he surrendered himself to Booth. Annoyed by Hank's behavior, but happy that everything had worked out, the captain made sure to mention the mitigating circumstances of how Hank had started to try to make things right. With that, the captain returned to Trevor. Trevor had already heard the news from Booth. He had always thought that Hank was a strange guy, but never thought that he might resort to such extreme measures. With that, he thanked the captain and paid them 11,000 credits, 50 iron ore, a Deimos spacesuit, helmet, power pack, and cap. As the captain turned to leave, Trevor suggested to them that they check in with one of his miners who wasn't doing too well. The captain had tried to talk to Rivkah before, but she had been quite closed-mouthed. After ingratiating themselves to the miners, she was ready to speak. Through a racking cough, Rivkah explained her situation. She was on the run, having fled her overbearing and powerful father, Natan Ovaja. She had grown up with her mother and father, and things had been good until her mother had died. At that point, Natan became quite protective and began to smother her. Her living conditions became worse and worse as time went on. After a particularly bad argument, she had knocked him out and taken his spaceship to escape. Natan, enraged when he came to, filed a police report on the stolen ship and pressed charges with the security force. She had gone underground to avoid imprisonment, but now she was quite sick, and it was getting worse. As much as she wanted to seek treatment, Natan was an executive with Reliant Medical, and the second Dr. Flynn entered her information, her father would be alerted to her position. Thus, she had continued to hide as her illness worsened. She asked the captain to seek out Natan and to try to convince him to back off. The captain agreed, and she revealed that her father was usually in the Hotel Volai in Neon this time of year. Beyond this, she suggested using her mother's name to soften his stance, and that he was a fan of Red Harvest Reserve whiskey. If the captain were to bring it as a peace offering from her, it might help get their foot in the door. The captain headed straight for the Broken Spear to ask Jack for a bottle. Before they could even ask about the bottle, Jack told the captain he knew they'd been the one to put up the poster of Space Frog from outer space in his bar. He liked Renee Shelby's drawings and was happy to leave it there, but told the captain to ask before putting anything else up. This wasn't the first time the captain had heard good feedback on the posters. Passing miners had talked about their love for the images, and even the governor had amended the no graffiti rule to allow the posters to stay up. As for the matter at hand, though, Jack revealed that the whiskey needed to help Rivkah was quite pricey. He had recently sold a bottle to Governor Hurst, and he was using it as a decoration and status symbol. While the captain considered just taking a bottle from the soon-to-be-arrested politician, they decided instead to attempt to barter with Jack for the bottle he did have. When the captain explained the intended use, Jack's demeanor softened. He was fond of Rivkah and knew of her troubles. If the bottle would help her, he would be happy to sell it to the captain at the cost at which he had originally purchased it, a significant savings. The captain paid him the 600 requested credits and made their way to their ship. A short flight later, the captain was walking through Neon Core. Upon entering Hotel Voli, the captain spoke with the proprietor, Minerva Clement, who was happy to extol the virtues of her independent operation. When the captain explained the reason for their visit, Minerva directed them up the elevator to Natan's suite. Though impatient, Natan was appreciative of the whiskey and was willing to speak with the captain. That said, it was going to take more for him to let the past ugliness go. The captain explained no, the whiskey wasn't supposed to smooth things over, it was just a means of getting a meeting. They were there to get him to drop the charges and leave Rivkah be. Using their powers of persuasion, they convinced Natan to let the past go. He had already lost his wife, and now his daughter was sick. He agreed to simply let the past lie, and stop sending bounty hunters after her. Instead, he would simply try to start a conversation so they might move towards reconciliation. Happy they had secured Rivkah's safety, the captain departed the Hotel Voli and headed back to Sidonia. Upon reaching Rivkah, the captain was happy to hear that Natan had already spoken with his daughter, and had indeed apologized for his past actions. They had a lot of work to do, but it seemed that the father and daughter were on the road to reconciliation. Further, Rivkah could finally get her cough treated properly. She thanked the captain and handed them 8,000 credits. With the opportunities to help the people of Sidonia winding down, the captain headed for the Broken Spear. As they neared the bar, they met the Trackers Alliance agent again. When asked about her quarry, she happily revealed that Ken Plackis had been arrested at the Mars launchpad, this time attempting to sell black market organs. The sting had gone so well, they had managed to capture the buyer for these goods as well. Buoyed by this news, the captain headed into the bar. Here they found the ladies of the Deimos office out at happy hour together. Not having had much of a chance to speak with them before, the captain introduced himself. Tia Wu, the head of HR, didn't have much to say, but Gilly Song, a psychologist for Deimos, was in a bit of a tizzy. She was under the gun with a lot of work to do, and she still needed psychological self-reports from a handful of Deimos workers. Knowing how the captain had helped Trevor, she asked if they would be willing to take on the job of getting them filled in and returned. The captain agreed to help and looked at the list. First, just in proximity, was Leona Hawks, who was a part of this happy hour party. The corporate liaison for Deimos, Miss Hawks took the form begrudgingly, asking Gilly why she was being forced to fill one out. Gilly responded that everyone in the company had to fill one out, even executives. Next came the miners on the mining floor. Both Andres and Salmond were happy to fill out their forms, and thus the captain was on their way back to Gilly with almost no delay. Upon returning to Miss Song, the captain handed over the documents, much to her cheer. She thanked the captain and provided them with 8,000 credits. It was around this time that the much-awaited announcement came over the PA system. It was a message from Commander Woodard. Governor Hurst was gone. Following up on the evidence provided by the captain, the commander had gone to the governor to arrest him. Facing the charges and evidence against him, the governor resigned his post. In his place was the now acting Governor Woodard. For the moment, the last governor's directives stayed in place, but the corrupt, philandering, attempted murder-for-hire customer was out of office. Having improved the city as much as they could for the moment, the captain headed back to their ship and blasted into space once more. Alright, that does it for the narrative, but I've got some notes before closing things out. First, along with covering non-quest related individuals, this video is a compilation of the stories of 15 side quests and an unmarked quest within the city of Sidonia and the Deimos Star Yard. While the Captain of the Frontier's interactions with the people involved in these quests is of course a part of the story, the order in which the player may interact with these stories is not necessarily the same order in which I shared them, nor did the stories necessarily end the way I showed them ending. Alternate versions of these events comprise many of the following notes. Second, if the player is in their first New Game Plus version of the game or later, there are many points in these quests where there are Starborn dialogue options available when speaking with the quest givers. In fact, every conversation with Trevor Petjar includes one, as does every conversation with Hank Ferraro. In fact, you can use the Starborn option to talk Hank down from his plan to kill you. I really enjoy these options because it makes manifest in-game a feeling I've had so many times when playing a game over again. Instead of just thinking, dude, I know you're going to betray me, I can say it to their face in-game, and it makes sense canonically. Third, if the captain doesn't have the persuasion skills to convince the Ecliptic mercenaries to report the Barry Mule destroyed, they're still willing to release Jane's captain, Eric von Price. Upon returning to Jane, she's clearly disappointed but resolute in her determination to start over and buy a craft without questionable legality. With her loss, she can only afford to pay the captain around 1,000 credits, and she can no longer employ Eric von Price. This leads to the option to pick von Price up as a traveling companion. Witnessing the captain talking the Ecliptic mercs into letting him go leaves him somewhat in awe of the captain, and he wants to learn from them. Fourth, there are multiple sources saying that Sidonia is attempting to expand its residential area, but the evidence for this isn't great. The floor of the mining floor area doesn't look like it's digging down. It looks more like a dumping ground for ore brought up from underneath where miners can process it. There are pieces of infrastructure embedded in the floor that don't appear to be temporary. Fifth, when it comes to Hank Ferraro, there are 3 possible outcomes. First, the captain can simply choose the attack option in the dialogue and kill him. Second, as detailed in the narrative, the captain can talk Hank down and get him to surrender to the authorities. Third, the captain can talk Hank down and then concoct a story in which he's the hero of the situation, having fought off imaginary pirates. If this option is chosen, Hank continues to work for Deimos, and during the Psyched quest, he is one of the employees that needs to fill out the form. Upon turning in those forms, the captain can tell Gilly Song to keep a close eye on Hank, which she says she's aware of but appreciates the corroboration of his instability. I think the version shared in the narrative is the best possible outcome. Hank has some antisocial behavior problems that can become extremely dangerous. If he was willing to put all his friends out of work and kill the captain just to get out of his contract, he needs to be off the job. That said, the fact that he confessed to it and was willing to face jail time tells me that he deserves a chance to better himself once he's had time to think about his actions. Samantberg Ramirez was once a criminal, and today he's a hard-working, law-abiding man. Hopefully Hank has a similar experience. Sixth, one of my favorite bits of dialogue comes from the first section of Red Tape Blues, when Trevor Petyar asks the captain to collect tin iron ore to see if they can follow directions. If the captain already has tin iron ore on them, they can offer it up, to which Trevor responds,
"Oh, huh. You just got iron laying around. You know what? Never mind. I won't ask."
Seventh, it's entirely possible that Governor Hurst stays in place at the end of these events. If the captain doesn't discover the evidence of the governor's crimes or doesn't bring the evidence to Commander Woodard, the governor will retain his post. Along with this, if the captain does obtain the evidence but prefers cash to justice, they can instead use the evidence to blackmail the governor. Hurst is willing to pay 12,000 credits for the evidence, after which he considers the matter closed. The overall difference in outcome for the player between these versions is practically nothing, but the removal of a corrupt politician engaged in attempted murder for hire is probably the better outcome. That said, it's also crazy that the governor would hand over such a damaging note to the Crimson Fleet. He presented a pirate gang with the perfect tool with which to blackmail him. He excuses it by saying that legal means a paper trail, but he simply could have just hired them to destroy the ship without including the bit about who stole it and the relationship with him. Eighth, in the quest Media Sponge, in which the player obtains a copy of Dragonstar Force for Mitch Benjamin, the location at which the book can be found isn't set. Just in 2 attempts, I found it in Hope Town on Polvo in the Valo system, and in Paradiso on Porama 2 in the Porama system. Ninth, when it comes to helping Rivkah Ovadia, there are multiple potential outcomes to dealing with her father. While I detailed the option that potentially ends in their reconciliation, it's also possible that the captain fails to convince Natan to leave his daughter alone. At this point, the conversation can go one of 2 ways. The captain refuses to give up Rivkah's location, Natan calls security, and the captain is arrested upon leaving the hotel. In returning to Rivkah, she is disappointed, but has chosen to get the treatment she needs regardless. In this version, she pays the captain 4,500 credits. If the captain gives up her location, the next time they return to Sidonia, Trevor reveals that Rivkah was captured by a bounty hunter. His response is gratitude for removing a wanted criminal from his team. Lastly, there's the option where the captain simply kills Natan. With this option, Rivkah has mixed emotions. She's finally free of her father's threats to her freedom, but at the same time, she's left with the guilt of his death. In this version, she also pays the captain 4,500 credits for their time. 10th, the quest Refurbished Goods requires visiting more than just one site. When I first took this quest, I believed that all was required was to go to the location as directed and bring back a pack of goods from the location's main loot chest. Then Mr. Averin told me that I didn't have enough of the Krakens he was looking for. It turns out that the quest marker is only a lead to a single weapon. He needs 5 at a time. This is probably better taken as a quest that you fulfill over time, and simply bring the package of weapons when you have them all. 11th, through this content I learned that the United Colonies controls UC Exchange and fixes the prices of goods across their territory. I suspected the UC might control it, as it's in the name after all, but I figured it might be a private corporation that simply chose a patriotic name. When the captain asks Dennis Averin about any deals to be had, he complains that UC accountants set the price of his goods, but that he can work something out. 12th, there's an unfinished horror movie script entitled It Came from Phobos on a table in the Broken Spear. It's nothing lore related, I think it's just a neat little touch. 13th, not only is there a Face of Mars monument in Sidonia, but the actual mesa mistaken for a face can be found just outside the city. Speaking of the face, I should also note that the Sidonia snow globe, which features the face of Mars, can be found on the face of Mars. The exact location of this collectible is 1,325 meters from a fracking station, 1,760 meters from your ship, and 1,404 meters from the Mars launch pad. On the surface map, you can see its location, and the locations of the points from which I triangulated this. I was having trouble finding it myself until I came across a Reddit post discussing it. Thank you to Reddit user Lesky for posting these triangulation distances. Lastly, these were just some of the stories from Sidonia. This covered a lot of side quests and unmarked content, and I think that it was a good way to get to know the city. That said, there are other stories that take place on Mars, particularly important stories that I'm looking forward to telling. Beyond that, I'm sure there will be more to come. I think that'll do it for this video. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube. Come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons: Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Ahotep, Prince Julius, and Chris G059 for their support. This has been the Resolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.